What if it had been possible for the Chinese community to have families?
This is my family tree, and this is my great-grandmother, my grandfather, and my grandmother. They came from China in the 1870s.
On the coast of California, near Monterey, some early Chinese communities did have families.
This spot is the site of the largest fishing village in Northern California. This is the Point Alonis village. It had a population, probably at its peak, close to 400 people. And it stretched across this terrain and starts in 1853. And certainly the most important feature of that community is over 40% of the people living in this village were female. And we're not talking prostitutes here, we're talking families. Babies were born here. Many babies were born here. This is a very unusual place. This is Chinese America that might have been. When the Chinese came here, they saw a coast covered with abalone. They stopped and said, "Excuse me, is anyone using this?" And waited, and people would say, "No, those are snails." They said, "Fine." And then they would set about to develop the industry. No one else was using the abalone. No one else was eating them. They're very difficult. They take technology to process. They cut them out of the shell, they dried them, baled them up, and then shipped them to San Francisco and ultimately to China. One of the pioneers of the abalone business here was a man named Jung San Choi.
Jung San Choi, he's a smart guy. First, he starts the abalone business, then sea cucumbers, sea urchins, then he sells abalone shells to tourists. This way, he always has a job. His wife has a job. His kids have a job. They can't go to white people's school, so they polish shells. They work at the abalone stand. Lots of kids, lots of grandkids. Big family.
This was burned in the fire in May of 1906. This is actually the remnants of the fire where most of this Chinese village was destroyed. The morning after the fire, the community of Pacific Grove descended upon the ruins and began to hunt for souvenirs. The landowner, the Southern Pacific Railroad, decided that they would take this opportunity to remove the Chinese village. They put up a fence, they got some guards, and they would not allow some of the Chinese to come back. Some of the Chinese refused to leave, and we will have a year-long standoff between the Chinese community, who felt that they deserved to be treated better, and a Southern Pacific Railroad, a major corporate power, who felt that they were the landlords and could decide who could live where. We have what I consider to be one of the first sit-ins in the history of this state. This is a place where the Chinese finally said, no more. They were not run out. They stood their ground.
My grandfather and grandmother had 14 children. I feel that they were very remarkable people. My mother wasn't a citizen because she had lost her citizenship when she married my father, who came from Hong Kong. While my mother was working in the shipyard in 1942, I joined the WAS, the Women Air Force Service Pilots.
Maggie G., pilot, one of the first women physicists, granddaughter of a Monterey fisherman. Monterey was unique because the Chinese lived amidst a Hispanic community and pioneered fishing industries well before white Americans had any interest. As long as they were not perceived as competition, Monterey was allowed to become the Chinese America that might have been.
But they did not want us to form communities. They wanted only our labor, and did everything they could to make us want to leave, not return, and tell others not to come.
Many laws were made just to discourage the Chinese. A sidewalk ordinance prohibiting shoulder poles, which they had always used to sell vegetables, deliver laundry, carry all manner of things. A head tax of $50 for every Chinese brought in by ship, along with a law prohibiting any ship carrying Chinese from docking unless in a storm. A cubic air ordinance saying how much space there had to be for each person in their crowded homes. The Chinese were given a choice: pay a fine or go to jail.
If we pay a fine, how can we send money to our village? So we went to jail. Now they make a new law to cut off our queues in jail. Without our queues, we can never go back to China. We go to the associations, to the Chinese 6 companies. We say, hire a lawyer. We fight this. Now Hoakau, our countryman, has his queue cut off in jail. So he sues the San Francisco Sheriff Newman for $10,000. Hoakau, he does not lie down.
The case went before the Federal Circuit Court in San Francisco. It was heard by 2 very famous judges. One was Stephen Field, who was a justice of the Supreme Court. In the opinion, Field said that the ordinance was null and void, that it violated the Civil Rights Act of 1870, and secondly, it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, that it was an attempt to impose a more severe penalty on Chinese than was imposed on others. Well, here was Field saying for the first time that the Chinese were protected by the 14th Amendment to the Constitution.
Our victory with Hoakau says that everybody, not just citizens, should be protected. Not just us Chinese, but everybody who is in America or foreigners who come to America should be protected. We did not know we would achieve something so big. Only that what happened to us was not fair, and we would fight it. But when we get justice for ourselves, we get it for everybody.
People always say, well, the Chinese always cling to their cultures. They never assimilated. They never really learned, about America. And it is true. Chinese kept their clothing styles. They continued to eat Chinese food. They continued to speak Chinese. And so in those aspects, they did keep their cultures. But in other ways, in terms of resisting the discrimination against them, they very much assimilated. From the early 1850s, they started making use of the American judicial system when such a system did not exist in China.
In fact, I would say it's hard to think of a single discriminatory law, a law perceived by the Chinese as discriminatory, that they did not challenge in court.
After all, did our enemies think we'd do nothing? That we would look in our mirror and agree with their poor opinion of us? That we would admire them, want to be like them, instead of who we are?
You see, it is the people who are denied these rights that Americans are supposed to have, who fought hardest for them. And in the process of fighting, we made the word American more international in scope to encompass people from all parts of the world instead of just people from Northwestern Europe. And so we basically, extended the promise of the American dream to a much wider range of human beings than the founding fathers may have had in mind.
We waited to hear what the judge would say, and then we set off all the firecrackers. Very happy, very proud.
This is the history of Chinese in the frontier West. It is a missing story in the making of America, not found in our history books, not told to our children. Leaving the village in China, they journeyed far with only each other and the power of memory, remembering families and villages an ocean apart, remembering how to make a home on the soil under their feet. Sustained by their unity, they drew from each place not only livelihood, but the wealth of land they reclaimed. With spirit and strategy, they fought for their place in America. This is their history, an American story.
This program has been made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities, expanding America's understanding for more than 30 years of who we were, who we are, and who we will be.
With additional funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the California Council for the Humanities, the Wallace Alexander Gerbode Foundation, Citibank, and the Lawrence Choi Low Memorial Fund.